All right, so this is the chapter 30 portion of the textbook that we didn't go over in class. This is the notes that you need to make sure that you know for the upcoming test. We're going to start off by just reviewing real quick. Remember, there were four key figures at the end of World War I that were kind of battling out over how things should look in Europe post World War I, and those four key figures met at the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. They again were Orlando from Italy, Clemenceau from France, George from Britain, and of course Woodrow Wilson from the U.S. And remember, the big riff here that takes place is that Wilson simply wants to just try to heal the wounds through his use of the 14 points and the League of Nations, and the other countries, Britain and France particularly want Germany to pay, and Italy wants more money and land. So there's a little bit of a difference going on between all the sides involved. And when it came to hammering out the treaty at home, there were U.S. senators who did not want to see us partake in any kind of a long-term alliance. There were some isolationists from the American standpoint, and this was a problem for Wilson because in order for the Treaty of Versailles to be approved, they needed to have a two-thirds vote in the U.S. Senate, which wasn't going to happen. And so Europe actually noticed that the American Senate wasn't behind the Treaty of Versailles, and they took advantage of it as well. There were demands from France for land in the Rhineland and the Saar. There was demands from Italy for Fayoum, and of course also Japan wanted China's Shantung Peninsula. So this was a constant battle of back and forth and trying to figure out how exactly we were going to come about getting an agreement on this peace treaty. The treaty itself was actually signed by France, the Treaty of Versailles. By Germany. There we go. The Treaty of Versailles was actually signed by Germany, and many Germans had hoped that Wilson's 14 points would be built into the treaty. However, they found out that after all the bargaining that took place, there were very few points that were included in the treaty, and so that really was an area of contention for a lot of Germans. And of course, they felt betrayed. They thought that they were going to be taken care of upon their surrender. And some of the people who were barking against the Americans and against this treaty included Adolf Hitler, which, if you're not familiar, he's going to be pretty important moving forward. Also, we have at this time a little bit of some back and forth going on stateside prior to the U.S., or at least with the U.S. trying to get the Treaty of Versailles signed. Henry Cabot Lodge, my tie's crooked. Henry Cabot Lodge was the big adversary to the Treaty of Versailles, and he was in the Senate. Of course, he decides to lead this this campaign against Wilson's treaty, and Wilson decides to fire back, and so he ends up going on this long stump where he tries to talk to people all over the country about why they should support the treaty, and he ends up collapsing due to exhaustion. Days later, he has a stroke, and he is paralyzed in half of his body. From that point on, he pretty much becomes an inactive president moving forward. Henry Cabot Lodge, he actually takes advantage of this, and he ends up going through and changing a bunch of the points that are part of the Treaty of Versailles. And his biggest issue is he wants to make sure that the Monroe Doctrine is protected and that we remain our right to rule ourselves. This idea of entering this League of Nations was really kind of foreign and scary for a lot of Americans. So again, Henry Cabot Lodge, he wanted to make sure that we maintain the Monroe Doctrine and that we also retain the right to rule ourselves. All right, he wasn't a big fan of the International Committee. Make sure that you review Article 10 of the treaty. This is the big one that was the sticking point for Henry Cabot Lodge. He said that it was required in Article 10 that the U.S. help a League of Nations that is attacked, and Lodge and Congress absolutely wanted to retain that right for themselves. They didn't want to be forced into any kind of foreign entanglements, and so that was one of the big amendments that he changed. By the time the voting went through and the Senate was ready to approve the treaty, Wilson and Lodge had kind of flip-flopped. Lodge had pretty much taken this treaty and had turned it on its head, and now Wilson was against the treaty and Lodge was in favor of the treaty. What ends up happening at the end of the day is that the U.S. never did accept the Treaty of Versailles, or thus the League of Nations. So it was all kind of for naught. Couple more things here from chapter 30. The election of 1920, people call it the Solemn Referendum. Warren G. Harding and his Republican VP Calvin Coolidge took on James M. Cox and his VP, a young Franklin Roosevelt. Cox was pro-League of Nations. Harding was the Republican candidate that basically ran on the idea that America wanted a break from Wilsonian high-mindedness and a return to normalcy. And of course, Harding ends up winning the election big time, 16 million to 9 million votes. And an interesting tidbit about this, remember at this time the Republicans have been able to come back together. By the election of 1920, Teddy Roosevelt has died. He's gone. He died in 1919. And so a lot of those progressives that were bull moosers kind of came back together into the Republican fold. Also, Eugene V. Debs is an important character as well. Remember, he was arrested during the Red Scare. He still got almost 1 million votes as a socialist candidate from behind bars. This, of course, raised a lot of people's eyebrows and their awareness of the fact that we had people supporting socialism in this country. So that was something that was important to understand as well. And of course, the ultimate irony here for chapter 30 is that World War I was billed as the war to end all wars, and actually what it pretty much did is just kind of fueled the fire to start World War II. America retreated into isolationism, and that, of course, helped breed World War II in a couple of ways. Number one, without allies to help in time of need, France went ahead and built up a massive military, which kind of sparked other people to take aim or to take notice of that in the area. And as punishment of Germany, it led to considerable suffering. And this opened the door for Adolf Hitler to gain support with wild ideas. Isolationism would also allow Hitler's Germany to rearm themselves largely without interruption. So that's it for chapter 30. I'll post this obviously along with the chapter 31 for unit 11 key videos. So hopefully you're viewing this.